Hello everybody. This is lesson 1 of chapter 5 and it is about body organization. Now, before we start, please keep your books next to you because we need to refer to them every now and then. Now, in your books, page 78, look at the heading on top, body cavities. What is the meaning of cavity or cavities? Look at the slide here. It says spaces within the body containing organs. So a space where you can find some organs of the body. For example, if you take the chest area in the body, what are the organs that you can find in the cavity inside it? Maybe we can find the heart, the lungs, all right? These two organs can be found where? In the chest cavity. So the cavity is a hollow or a space, all right, which contains certain organs. Now in the body, we have, according to the book, let's go back to the book, we have 7 cavities, all right? But these 7 cavities, they come under 2 main cavities, major cavities. Let's look at the slide now. Let's look at the slide. We have, number 1, the dorsal cavity, and under this dorsal cavity we have other cavities. And number 2, ventral cavity. And under this cavity again we have other cavities. Now let's go to number 1, dorsal cavity, which has another meaning, posterior. We call it posterior cavity. Posterior means at the back, on the back side of the body. Okay? Now, under this, or within, let's say, within this cavity, we have 2 other cavities. One is called cranial cavity, and the other one vertebral cavity or spinal. We call it spinal cavity, vertebral cavity or spinal cavity. Now number 2, the ventral cavity, it has another name which is anterior cavity, and it is where on the belly side of the body. The belly side means the abdomen, the front side of the body. Now, 2 major cavities come under ventral cavity. The first one is thoracic cavity, which is the chest area. The thoracic cavity, we call it. So it is what? The chest area. And the other one, abdominopelvic cavity. See, abdomen, pelvic, 2 parts together. Abdominopelvic cavity, which is at the lower part of the body. And you can see under this abdominopelvic, we have abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. Now, in total, we have 7 cavities here. And in the figure, it is clear. You can see in the figure, whether in your books or in the slide here, they are divided clearly. Okay? Now, let's look at the parts or the organs that could be found in each of these cavities. We said that the dorsal cavity, which is the posterior, contains 2 major cavities, cranial cavity and spinal or vertebral cavity. Now, the cranial cavity, what is the organ that could be found in the cranial cavity? It is the brain. Cranial, maybe you have learned this earlier, it means what? The skull. Crani, which means the skull. What is inside the skull? we have the brain. The vertebral or spinal cavity, what is the organ that could be found there? It is the spinal cord. Now, the ventral cavity, which is in the front, we have the thoracic, we said the chest area, the chest, the thoracic cavity. What could be found there? We can find the heart and the lungs. And of course, there are maybe other parts or organs. Now, in the abdominopelvic cavity, we said that this cavity is divided into two cavities, abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. Now, the abdominal cavity contains the liver, the intestines, whether small or large intestines, the stomach, the kidneys. And in the pelvic cavity, we can find the reproductive organs, the male and female organs, the urinary bladder, parts of the large intestines also. Now let's see page 80 in your books. Again, the title, Directional Terminology. What is meant by directional terminology? Terms or words that we use to describe the location of certain parts or organs in the body. So look at the definition under directional terminology in the slide here. So in healthcare we use what? Or we need directional terms. So directional terms are needed. Why? To describe the position of the body parts. When we talk about where, let's say, is the heart located? Where is the heart located? Where are the lungs located? Where is the colon located? So we need to learn some words to help us describe the position of these parts. But before we go to the these terms, we need to learn something about what is called anatomical position. Anatomy, you remember this word? The structure. Position. What is the anatomical position, the standard position? It is, look at the slide here, it says standard position. The body is standing erect. First of all, we talk about a person who should be standing up, not sitting, not lying down, standing up. So standing erect, upright in the vertical position, just like in the picture as you can see, this girl. What else? The arms should be by the side, not bent, not held up or twisted to the back. They should be at the side of the body. The arms by the side. The head, again, you should be facing the front. The head, the face to the front. The palms, look at the palms here in the picture. These are the palms of the hand. They should be facing the front. The feet, again, look at the feet, facing forward, not to the side or the back. So this is what is called the anatomical position. Again, if you go to your books, page 80, look at this person. He is standing up. His hands are beside his body. The palms facing forward. The head again facing forward. And the feet facing forward. Now, we need to learn some terms, as we said, called directional terminology. These words or terms are called directional terminology to describe the directions, the positions of the different organs in the body. Now, again, we have to refer to the book and to the slide at the same time. If you look at your books, at the man standing, all right, facing us, there is a line cutting this person from top to bottom, and it is in the middle, exactly in the middle. It cuts the person to two halves, one left and one right, and the two halves are identical. They are the same size. In this case, if you cut a person into two identical parts from top to bottom, passing or going through the midline, we call this mid-sagittal plane. Mid-sagittal plane, as you can see in your books, the first term on top, mid-sagittal plane. First of all, what is the meaning of plane? Let me give it in Arabic, the meaning in Arabic, so that it is clear to you. Plane here means maqta. All right, when you cut something, you have two planes. If you have an orange, for example, or an apple, and you cut it into two halves, if you take one half and look at it, it shows you a plane. So maqta, we call it maqta, a plane. All right. Now let's look at the slide here. The slide. All right, the slide. If you look at the yellow line, it is cutting the person into two identical parts. Why? Because it is coming right in the middle. And we call this yellow line, we call it midline. Look at the word which is at the bottom. Midline. Why do we call it midline? Because it is exactly in the middle. So it is a line which is coming in the middle. That's why we call it midline. All right? Now, the two halves, if you cut this person into two parts, we call the plane that comes out in each part, we call it mid-sagittal. So look at the top right corner side, we have a plane there called mid-sagittal plane. Mid means in the middle. So the mid-sagittal plane means that it cuts the person into two identical parts. Look at the definition below that. It says, if the sagittal plane runs directly down the midline, you see, down the midline, which means cutting the person into two similar parts, it is called a mid-sagittal plane or median plane. Now, let's look at the left side, sagittal plane. What is meant by sagittal? It runs vertically from top to bottom. Again, it goes from top to bottom, but it's not necessary to be in the middle. Look at the red line now. Look at the red line, the body. It is going from top to bottom, cutting the person into two parts, but the two parts are not the same, not identical. All right? We have a left portion or a left part and a right part, but these two parts are not identical. They are not the same. In this case, we call the plane, all right, any plane we get from this, let's say, as a result of this line, we call it sagittal plane. All right, we call it sagittal. But if it is in the middle, following the yellow line, we call it mid-sagittal. So this is the difference between sagittal plane and mid-sagittal plane. Now, let's look at your books again. We have other words. Look at the word medial. Can you see that? We are still looking at the first figure. Medial, what does it mean? Toward the median. which means toward the middle side, the middle line. All right? So if you are talking about an organ which is closer, nearer to the midline, we describe it as medial. Now lateral, look at lateral. What does it say? Away from the median, which means it is far from the midline. Far from the midline. So look at the arrows. If it is going towards or if it is closer to the midline, we describe it as medial. If it is going away from the midline, we call it or we describe it as lateral. Now on the left side, let's look at the left side of the figure. We have proximal and distal. Can you see them? Now, what is meant by proximal? Look at your books. It means nearest point of attachment. Nearest point of attachment. Now, the arm is attached to the body in the joint, which is the shoulder, right? So, if we are talking about something which is closer to this joint, which is the shoulder, in other words, to the body as a whole, so it is proximal. If it is away from this attachment point, so we describe it as distal. Let me give you an example. If I want to compare a finger to the elbow, all right? A finger to the elbow. Which is proximal in this case? We say the elbow is proximal to the finger. Why? Because it is closer to the shoulder, to the point of attachment. The elbow is closer to the point of attachment, but the finger is away. Now, if I want to describe the finger, in this case, I have to use the word distal. I say the finger is distal to the elbow, comparing the two parts, the finger, the elbow again. The finger is distal to the elbow, which means it is farther from the elbow according to the attachment point. Okay? Again, if you look at this figure, it gives, let's say, a clear picture of the anatomical position. First of all, we have a person standing up facing us. The palms, the arms are next to the body, the feet all to the front. So this is the anatomical position. We talked about the midline. Look at the red dotted line here, going from top to bottom, cutting the person into two parts. So this is called the midline. We talked about medial and lateral. Medial, which is closer or nearer to the midline. Lateral, away from the midline. We talked about proximal and distal. Again, proximal, you see the arrow, it is closer to the, or nearer to the point of attachment, but distal, it is away from the point of attachment. All right. So here we gave an example of the finger and the elbow. Look at the legs here. We can again give another example regarding let's say the distance from the point of attachment. If I'm talking about the knee and the ankle, knee and ankle, which is proximal in this case? So the knee, if I want to describe them, I can say the knee is proximal to the ankle. But if I want to talk about which is farther from the point of attachment, I say the ankle is distal to the knee. All right? So this is just an example. We have two other words, as you can see here in the slide, superior and inferior. Let's look at your books now. Look at your books. The second figure, if you look at the second figure to the right, now we have two planes here. The first one, if you look at the line which is cutting the person from top to bottom, cutting it to two portions, one front portion and the other one is back portion. See here, this is different. This is a different plane, different from the sagittal or mid-sagittal. The sagittal or mid-sagittal, it cuts the person into two, let's say, portions, one left and one right. Here, it cuts the person, which is, I'm talking about frontal or coronal. It cuts the person into two parts, but one is front and the other one is back. Okay? So what do we call this plane? We call it frontal or coronal plane. All right? The other plane, look at the middle of the person. There is something cutting the person into two parts, but one is top and the other one is bottom. See? It is different now. We call this plane transverse. Transverse or horizontal. Horizontal plane. Transverse plane or horizontal plane, which cuts the person into two parts, upper and lower. Okay, upper portion or part and lower portion or part. Now let's come to the words superior and inferior. Superior, see here, if it is closer to the top part or the upper part, then we say that it is superior. If it is closer to the ground, look at the arrow. If it is closer to the ground, then we call it inferior. Okay? The other two words now in your book, the other two words at the bottom of figure 2, we have anterior and posterior. This is what we talked about, the parts that we get from the frontal or coronal plane. Anterior plane or frontal plane or ventral, even we call it. The other one will be posterior, which is the back plane. This is another figure to show us again some of these words, how they can be described. Medial, again, going in the middle, cutting the person right in the middle. Proximal and distal, you see the arrows. If it is closer to the point of attachment, then it is proximal. If it is away, then it is distal. We have lateral, you see, and of course the other one is medial, which is closer to the midline. Lateral is away from the midline. If it is closer to the upper part, we say superior. If it is closer to the ground, we say inferior. This is just, summarizing the terms that we have talked about. Now here again we have the summary. As you can see, the planes, the planes, the types of planes. We have three types of planes. We talked about sagittal, mid-sagittal, all right? So either sagittal, which cuts the let's say the person into two parts, but not necessarily to be identical, and the two parts would be one left and the other one right. Frontal or coronal plane, it cuts the person into two parts again, one front and one back. Ventral or anterior, and posterior or dorsal. The other one, transverse or horizontal plane, which cuts the person into two parts, one upper part and the other one lower part. Now here, this let's say explains or gives a clear picture of what is meant by sagittal. You see here, this cuts the person into two halves, one left and one right. If it is in the middle, then it is mid-sagittal. All right. This one is frontal. As you can see, it cuts the person into two parts, front and back. This one is transverse or horizontal plane. We talked about this. We said that it cuts the person into two parts, upper and lower parts. Again, these are the three planes together. They are clear, as you can see. Now, again, more information about the words or the terms we need to use as directional terminology. Look at these two words, posterior and anterior. We talked about them. Posterior, we said that it is at the back, or there is another name which is dorsal. You see, you have to learn these: posterior, dorsal, all right, and back. They give the same meaning. So here, posterior or dorsal means the opposite of anterior. And they mean back of or behind, on the back. The opposite is anterior or ventral, which means front of. Now we have other directional terms: deep and superficial. Deep and superficial, they are used in English, common English, all right? But we use them again as directional terms to describe planes. What is meant by superficial here? It means toward or at the body surface. Superficial, closer to the surface. All right? But deep, it means away from the body surface, or it means more internal. And you can see in the plane here, it is clear. So superficial means closer to the surface. Deep, closer to the inside, deep inside. Now, other directional terminology or terms, we have supine and prone. Supine and prone. What is meant by supine? You can see the figure. If the person is lying on his back, we call this position as supine. So supine means lying on the back, face up, okay? Face up. But prone is the opposite. If the person lies down on his face down, we call it prone. So they are the opposite. Supine is the opposite of prone. Supine means lying down face up. Prone means lying down face down. Other terms, we have dorsum and plantar, and you can find these in your books, but maybe yeah, they are clear there, and here in the again in the figures they are clear. So what is meant by dorsum? Dorsum means top of foot. Look at dorsal surface. Dorsal surface in the first figure means dorsum, all right, which is the top of the foot. We call it dorsum. The bottom of the foot or the sole of the foot, we call it plantar. Okay, we call it plantar. This is another figure to show the meaning of dorsum and plantar. And as you can see here, it can be used not only for the foot, even for the hand, it can be used to describe the hand. So dorsum regarding the hand, it means the dorsal surface, the upper surface, the top surface of the hand. And the palm, which is the inside part of the hand, is called palm. So dorsum and palm, but when it comes to the foot, it is dorsum and sole. All right. So this is regarding dorsum and plantar. Now, before we finish this lesson, you can see in your books, if you go back to your books, page 82, you have a list of the directional terms, and it is good here. All of them are put in one page with their meanings and examples. So it is easier for you to learn the directional terms from this list here, because the examples again make things clear. Okay.